Hello, you, you beautiful bastards. Uh, oh, rat farts. Hold on. I knew I forgot something. Hold on. I had to start over. I was going to start the stream early, and then this shit happened. The my backup power supply is apparently going out. So I had to reboot everything. So if I got on time. That was just pure coincidence. That was just dumb luck. Okay? So I'll be back on here. It should be a couple times a week, extemporizing. And we'll get, what I'm going to do is, let me play the theme.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
You're in violation of secure communication procedures, Commodore.
So we just went ahead and fixed the glitch.
There is no America. There is no democracy.
Our fifth objective, a new world order.
There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West.
Right-wing conspiracy.
What do you call it when the assassins accuse the assassin?
A new world order.
Thank you for plugging in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
Well, just a second there, Professor. We fixed the glitch.
I'm your host, Professor Thomas Henry Horan.
He reads everything.
Hello there, you beautiful, bountiful, bodacious boosters. You better bet your bippies he reads everything. I'm going to throw some of it at you right now. First, let me mention that you did not hear this from me. And if you run over there and blab that I told you this, I will deny. I will throw you under the bus. As far as I know, I will soon be appearing again, well, you know how soon, on Walter Bosley's show. I am going to show him what I have showed you guys over the last year or so. Well, it's been a minute, right? When did I stop? I stopped in August. Yeah. Richard Feynman said the best vacation was a different kind of work. Here we go again. So, I'm going to show him what I showed you about, plus some, that you haven't seen yet. Why Google and Apple are shitting their collective panties over the Epstein files. Because I've already showed you most of it. There's more. Why it doesn't matter whether Serge or Larry or any of those guys did anything wrong. It doesn't matter. Wouldn't have been Woz anyway. Jobs. It doesn't matter. Do you know the damage it would be done if anybody watches Walter's show? And I promised him I would tell him and his listeners how I know. Now I can't show, but I will tell. And you don't have to believe it because I will show what I've already showed you guys, right? But I will tell something about how I know, and I do know. But I didn't know, right? It took time. And there's a reason how my brain got trained to see a certain pattern. They trained me to see the pattern. They didn't know that. Well, they kind of knew that. I'll explain. And then if he decides to include that in the episode, he can. And either way, then I will tell you guys more about that. But I've never asked you to believe anything because I said it, and I still don't. But it's not just what I know. It is how I know it. And how it came to my attention. And it was lying right there in the open. I showed you guys most of it. But you don't know where they got their you don't know everything about where they got their technology from. I will show you. And what this has to do with John Bonet, and what this has to do with what I'm going to talk about tonight, which is the Holy Grail, and Joseph of Arimathea, and the Templars, and the Freemasons, and King James I, and the Folgers, and the Stanfords, and Muhammad, may he rest in peace, or whatever the hell you're supposed to say, and Jesus, which I guess we don't wish that he rests in peace. When was the last time anybody wished Jesus a nice day? Does he get a day off? I hope he likes his job. I'm not making fun of anything. What I want to talk about is Lazarus. What the fuck happens to Lazarus? Because the weird thing about Joseph of Arimathea is the weird thing about Lazarus. Lazarus has access to, use of, a private tomb. These were temporary. For most Jews and a lot of people in that area at that time, there was going to be a judgment day. The dead would be resurrected. The bones last. They're made of stone. The bones of the gods are made of silver. The flesh of men is made of clay, which corrupts. It must be cleaned from the bones. If the flesh is not cleaned from the bones, the ruach, the spirit of the person, their psyche, will wander the earth trying to climb back into their bones in their body. They won't be free to go and rest. Well, that you're gone. So when on Judgment Day, the righteous will be resurrected if their bones are clean, and they will be given new bodies, spirit bodies, which would be tantamount to possibly gold, which is what the flesh, the skin of the gods is supposedly made of. That's why ISIS has to make a replacement penis out of gold, because that is what the skin of the gods is made of. And conveniently, this will always be conveniently ready. But this matters because the Egyptians are apparently the first civilization to understand that it's not the meat and it's not the motion, it's the gravy. Ancient peoples apparently believed that the motion, the physical motion involved in sexual intercourse is what stimulated the pregnancy process, because it's not obvious. I mean, some women claim they can tell. Maybe they can. They probably can. But it's not obvious. You can't prove that. The Egyptians were the first ones. That temple complex at Karnak, that's what that's all about. They never show you inside the temple of Karnak. I will explain it later. But it's all about this discovery. It's about the semen, and that's what causes pregnancy. Now, that's the water. And then the blood, of course, is the menstrual blood that is associated with women. If the word means anything to you, maybe it doesn't. I don't even care anymore. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I just do. Everybody. The point is this. What's the difference between Jesus' blood and Lazarus' blood? What does it mean? Why does Paul split this hair over resurrection in the flesh over resurrection in the spirit, vice versa? And there's this discussion. This stuff gets deep. Trust me. Trust me. The Bible is actually written by some very smart people, once you know what it's about. What it's about is the money. And I'm not exaggerating or kidding. Because in the ancient world, the cosmology went like this. Whether you're Jew, Christian, Muslim, pagan, the cosmology went like this. There were two systems. There was the inner system, which was sometimes explained by the four humors, but this was secret knowledge. This was professional knowledge, right? Every profession is a conspiracy against the laity. This was the secret knowledge of doctors, was the four humors. This was one kind of doctor. They understood the secrets of the four humors. You didn't know this. But the cosmology was there was an inner system, and physical ailments were an indication, or psychiatric ailments were an indication of something wrong in the inner system, whatever it was. Humors are out of balance, whatever. The outer system was cosmos. That was not the kind of infinite universe that's our cosmos. Their cosmos was only a few thousand miles across. Really highly educated people probably knew that the universe was probably 1 million miles across, and that blew their minds. It was a conceivable, comprehensible place that was supposed to run according to certain rules. And there were people here who were supposed to be running it according to those rules. And anything that was wrong with the cosmos was people not doing things correctly, either displeasing the gods who were upsetting the cosmos, or the gods' administrators, the vicars on earth, not doing their jobs correctly, not following the law correctly, not recording the law correctly. That's what was wrong with the cosmos. There were the two systems, the inner system and the outer system. Now, in this cosmos, man's inner system, every animal's inner system, borrowed life force from the cosmos, from the outer system. Whether that source was Yahweh or that source was Hurra Mazda, forget that. So like when we hunt or slaughter an animal, we get the meat, but the life of that animal still belongs to the creator, whoever that creator is. And so the blood is the life, obviously. No blood, no life. And that is sacrificed, that share goes back to the God, because the life of the animal belonged to God, whatever God. And human life, same thing. We owe our life to the creator. Our blood is a loan. We borrowed this and we owe it back to the creator when we die. And during that time, we owe interest on that loan. This is all about money. This is where blood sacrifice comes into. And if you didn't keep your blood pure through sacrifice or whatever, you ran the risk when you died of not being worthy of resurrection or whatever. This was the general cosmos at play at the time. Now, there were secret advanced college degrees in cosmology, like there was alchemy, there was, what's the system of the four humors called? That was Paracelsus, right? There were all these systems, but they were secret knowledge. You had to pay to learn. Avoid ripoffs. Send $10. The Apocalypse of John. This is a free pamphlet. Look, the world's coming to an end, don't you see? And if you understand that, you have a higher mind. That means that you're a fallen angel. And we're going to get to the origin of the fallen angel myth. We're going to go back 12,000 years, 14,000 years. The fallen angel and the serpent and the Savior. And what happens, how men obtain the creative power to make the gravy in the first place. Where does that come from? How does that happen? It's all about the money. What's this got to do with Joseph of Arimathea? Well, and Lazarus. Well, first of all, Lazarus is a cat who has a private tomb. And when he passes away, now, your paterfamilias are supposed to let you use the tomb, I think, if you were good, so that you could perform. You don't want a bunch of evil spirits. They're not evil spirits. They're the ghosts of the dead who can't rest because their bones have not been properly cleaned. These are unclean spirits. You don't want them running around. They might go in and inhabit relatives' bodies or strangers' bodies or dogs' bodies. You don't want this to happen. So you would let your family use your tomb. If you were lucky enough to have a paterfamilias, if you're not just a slave, owned by a company, a labor company. Kelly Services of the ancient world. It's the same contract, by the way. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. If you ship something, UPS, read the contract. Nothing has changed. Nothing. I couldn't find one thing that had changed in 12,000 years. So it's all about the money. Now, in Christianity, the resurrection of Jesus is the sign that the judgment day is here, the dead are rising from the grave and being judged by Jesus, whatever. That's the sign. Okay, to those people we must ask, what about Lazarus? Why wasn't Lazarus the sign that the end times had come? I'm telling you, these books were written by and for lawyers, accountants, tax collectors, bankers. They're like, what happened to his estate? It's only been 3 or 4 days. It wouldn't have had time to probate the estate, right? Everything's in limbo, right? Because once he's resurrected from the dead, but the story bends over backwards that he was legally dead. How do you legally resurrect somebody who was legally dead? Do you just walk in there and tell them, hey, I'm not dead? You can't do that nowadays. You cannot reactivate your dead if you've been declared dead by a court. It's not something that, if any court decides that for purposes of this procedure, you are legally dead, that's it, you're legally dead. You have to start over with a new Social Security number. They don't roll over your account. You're dead. I'm not kidding. The last time I knew about this. So, what happens to Lazarus' estate? What happens to Lazarus' identity? What happens to Lazarus' debt to the temple? Traditionally, the temple or whoever, they knew better than to loan somebody more than 1 year's potential income. So you could borrow enough money for seed or for a mama and a papa goat or something. That's it. Your loan you could only collateralize 1 year of expected earnings. If you're a major, you have a large plantation, your family's been operating a large successful operation, you might be able to monetize 3 years. And under this system, you don't pledge the whole farm. You're not borrowing against the value of the farm, which nowadays it's like 7 years revenue, right? A business is worth 7 years revenue, gross revenue, average, I think. Is that still the rule of thumb? That's how it was. You could only borrow against 1 year's anticipated revenue. In case you died, most laws and common law was that your debts were wiped out when you died. But under the Sadducees, these fake Zadokites, who are taxing the people to death and running up tabs at the temple over these sin taxes, this is a situation where if you display an illness, there's something wrong with the inner system. Under Jewish law, that was a sin, and you had not atoned properly, you had not expiated that sin properly, you owed a bigger sacrifice. This is a world where people are scared to death to get sick. Not because they're afraid they're going to die, but they're afraid to get sick because they're going to go into debt. And they're afraid that the worse the illness is, the deeper into debt their family's going to go. Does this sound familiar? And they have no alternative. And this isn't just the law, this is also their holy law. It's one cosmos. The cosmos is going to fix what's wrong with you by taxing you. If you pay more money, that will remove the sin that's making you sick. Oh, you're getting sicker? Well, you owe more money. They were literally doing this. All ancient writers agree on this. This was a real scam. And a lot of temples were starting to do this. Because the Romans are just smash and grab. They're just squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. So when Jesus resurrects this wealthy man, he may have been up to his eyeballs in debt that had been racked up, not by every member of his household. Every dependent would be dinged for these ridiculous sin taxes payable to the bank, the temple. He may have been up to his eyeballs in debt, and dying was the only way to get out from under that debt, except by this time, sometime before 1 AD, Hillel the Elder appeased the mob demanding a debt jubilee. And the other thing was, when a new king came to the throne, or by tradition, maybe every 7 years, there'd be a debt jubilee. All debts would be wiped out. But that wasn't a financial crisis because no one was supposed to loan you more money than you could pay back in a year anyway. There were real limits on loans. There was financial regulation. And it was sensible. They took the risk of debts being canceled, but they limited their risk. But Hillel the elder comes up with, the Romans will not allow this, and they claim that legally the tetrarch or whoever is ruling the quasi-king, the basileus, does not have the legal authority to cancel debts to the national temple. He's a client king of Rome, and Rome says no. So the people are groaning for a king over this whole United Kingdom. Whether it was ever real or not, we'll get back to that. So that he has the authority to issue a debt jubilee because it's bleeding. It's just breaking the back of the country. It's bleeding it dry. This piling up of debt at the state temple. The national debt is so high because the Herodians have been spending money on the basis of expected revenues from these projects like Caesarea Maritima, which was a very profitable operation. Oh my God, it's so modern. And it made money. It made money. The temple complex was becoming the syndicate reserve bank. This is going to matter when we talk about Islam. Islam's all about the money. It has everything to do with the temple bank in Jerusalem. And speaking of Muslims, with the Templars, this is all about the money. It is all about the money. It is all about the money. Now, if the debt that you owed God was your blood, how was he supposed to get it back? When you died, and if you died in an accident. See, that's why it's a sin to spill the blood. The blood drains away into the earth that cries out for vengeance. And when Christ dies, here's my point, dude. Christ's blood leaks out. Christ's blood is the sacrifice, according to a pretty broad spectrum of opinion here. That is the sacrifice. When you died, your blood may not be pure enough to buy your way out of hell, but Jesus' blood would be, by definition, that we go through that has it has everything to do with the money. The people owed the original sin of being born. You took out this loan of life. You can never repay it adequately. You can't. Because human sacrifice is out. This is interesting. Or is it? Because if Christ's blood is the sacrifice, why was it allowed to pour into the ground? That's a... Hold on. That is a chronic sacrifice. Chronic sacrifice. When the blood goes in the ground instead of being burned on the altar and sent to heaven. That's a chthonic sacrifice. These were old gods. Chthonic gods. There are plenty of them. Odysseus' ancestors, he gets the blood, he pours it on the ground. It's bait. It's bait. They will fade away without blood. Sacrifice. His ancestors will. And the dead. And he makes them trade information about what's going on. He gets intelligence information about what's been going on since the end of the war by using blood to extract information from the dead. That's a chthonic sacrifice. When Constantine is initiated into the cult of Mithra, the final initiation is he becomes a god. A bull is sacrificed to the initiate. The initiate is under a grating, and the bull is up here, and they cut the bull's throat, and the blood is not burned on the altar and sent to God in the name of Constantine. That blood is sacrificed to Constantine as a chthonic god who now rises from the earth or whatever. That's what Constantine was doing. We know this. They've reconstructed. Oh my God. So, and this is what's been going on today. But I know what you're thinking. That's Christ's blood is supposed to be like Isaac's blood, for example. Christ has appeared many times through history. Is what the Bible's, that's the thread that supposedly weaves it together, and it's very clever. It's more than just clever. The point is, Isaac's blood was supposed to be sacrificed on the altar of fire. If Isaac was the lamb that was supposed to be sacrificed, and God stopped Abraham's hand. He doesn't forbid human sacrifice. Does he forbid? I think he forbids human sacrifice. He does say later on, this is repeated 5 times by Moses. He says, "Do not offer your children unto me as a sacrifice." So Moses tells the people no more blood sacrifice, no more human sacrifice. This is important because it's all about the money. I argue that pre-writing, gold became a substitute for human sacrifice. And I'll explain why. Gold was considered the flesh of the gods. And alchemists could make it. I mean, gold was, it could be made. This is the secret of alchemy. A couple ways of making gold. And it was considered the essence of the blood of the gods. It was the light, in solid form. It was puddled light. And so I argue that became good enough for sacrifice, good enough for human sacrifice. This became a substitute for human sacrifice. Because human sacrifice does get banned. It was practiced. And archaeologists tell us that the Phoenicians did practice. They did sacrifice their own children. And so did the Maya. The Maya were expected to bleed more than anybody. The higher you were, the more you were expected to bleed for the people. They had the exact same cosmology. So this goes back a long way. The life of the animal, the life of the person belongs to God, and that's the blood. That's the anima that powers everything. This was the cosmology. It is still the cosmology today. We instinctively know that the blood is the life. And it is. No blood, no life. So that's why it's important. I'll go into this later. It's why it's important for Paul that Christ is, hi Lord, that Christ, sorry I didn't say hello last week. I had to break my neck now to look at the chat. Christ, for Paul, so Hillel, Paul is apparently a graduate of the law school of Hillel. Hillel comes up with a debt relief, which is that the temple state will remit your debt upon death, not redeem it, not pay it off, not cancel it, remit it. The temple state will take over the lien, take over the payments on your debt on your farm. Are you with me? They don't want to foreclose, they want the revenue. But they will take over the lien. Paul will set up his church as the replacement, the new temple, and that means the new Jewish transnational state reserve bank. You will see, I'm not kidding. It's a partial, he's partially successful. We'll talk about Constantine's mistake. To fast forward, human sacrifice is out. So human blood is never offered on the altar to Jehovah, to Yahweh, to the Hebrew God. It's really not done. This is considered black magic, or it's done in extremis. But it has been practiced, and has been practiced by elites, and has been practiced by Phoenicians, and we'll come back to that. The Phoenicians were all about the money. The flaming eagle rising from the ashes is about the gold rising from the alchemical process, which is a real process. You can do this at home. It won't be good for you, but you can do this at home. It's not, don't do this. It has to do with blood. So I'm going to come back I'm going to keep nitpicking the Lazarus story, because what did Lazarus' wife say? Well, Jesus has risen from the dead, and he's out starting a whole new corporation. It's like a religion with these people. It's like the Apple fanboys. He's got all these fanboys. I'll do it next week. Like, what happens to him? What happens to him? Hey, you've been raised from the dead. Yeah, you told us that story already. What happens to him? Well, this is actually what Paul, when he talks about dying the death, he's talking about faking your own death for legal purposes. He's talking about joining this new kind of Judaism is all about faking your death for legal purposes. There's a novel called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And in it, there is this transgalactic rock star who spends a year dead for tax purposes. This is exactly what Paul is talking about. If you are declared legally dead, then the temple, which is we now call the church, takes over the mortgage on your farm. For what it's worth, Joseph of Arimathea has no sons. He has 2 daughters, or he has 2 sisters, one of whom acts like Jesus' wife. This is important. This is important. This is alchemical. This is steganography. And it is in a lot of the Bible. The Gnostics have a point. Then they're all about the money. So here's the thing about Lazarus' resurrection. Jesus resurrects Lazarus, apparently. Lazarus just goes back to his job at Taco Bell. When Jesus is crucified, Joseph of Arimathea says, I'll take the body, which is a very nice gesture. It is a nice gesture on his part, to take the body and prepare it for burial, and they can use his tomb. They'll have to. The reason they come visit the body is they have to deflesh the body. What's that called? They have to remove the flesh from the body. Like they took care of the dead, and if they don't do a good job, they don't do a thorough job, the ghosts will come back to haunt them in the form of evil spirits, and their relative will not be resurrected on Judgment Day. And who's going to inherit all this property, by the way? Nobody seems to have thought this through. Nobody seems to have thought it through. Who's going to own all this property if everybody gets resurrected on Judgment Day? Who inherits? Who uninherits? Who disinherits? Who re-inherits? What goes on? It's all about the money, and I'm going to show you. We're going to go on and on about this. But the other thing is, what about the blood? What about Christ's blood? If it's so precious, if it's the sacrifice, if it's the final paschal sacrifice, the final perfect lamb, the blood was accepted. Why? How do we know it was accepted if it wasn't burnt on the altar? Why isn't Christ's blood burned on the altar if it's the final sacrifice? Why is Christ's sacrifice a chthonic sacrifice? Why is that? Now, there's a ancient Christian theologian who comes up with a brilliant loophole. It's brilliant. He says this is linked to the story of Christ descending into the underworld. That's why he has to go in the tomb. His blood is trickling down through the earth. His body is placed in the tomb under the earth. He goes down into hell. The blood comes down and baptizes himself in his own perfect blood, and that completes the cycle. And that's how he resurrects himself from the dead, by using his own blood, which has the power of resurrection. He resurrects himself. How are you supposed to get this blood? Well, there's the magic ritual of communion. That's one way of doing it. There are people trying to figure this out, because to them it's not mumbo jumbo. It's science. They're following the science. I'm going to get to the science of money in a minute. That was the highest science, was the science of money. The Romans had the best metallurgists in the world. They had a process for counterfeiting their own money that would astound you. I will show you. If you want to get me something for my birthday, I want you to buy me one of these coins. I'll show you later. They're worthless. It's just shipping and handling. The coin is free. You pay shipping and handling, you get one. You think this is worthless? This is a promissory note to pay a certain sum of monies. This is used as currency because people believe it has value or utility as currency because they believe it is backed by some assets, not directly. Well, this is a promissory note backed by collateral in vaults that you are not allowed to audit. No one's allowed to audit. This is the Federal Reserve Bank. There are assets, but they're not really there. They're not really the collateral of the loan, the note. The real collateral is the expectations of future tax revenues based on current tax code and census data and current economic data from the Federal Reserve Bank. Guess who collects the data? Gosplan. They have become Gosplan. By de facto Gosplan. They have. Central Planning Committee. We have become the Soviet Union. The temple has completely corrupt. We've become the Soviet Union. My point is this. The collateral is the Treasury bonds. The Treasury, who collects taxes, issues as an investment opportunity to the free and open market. You can buy these. You can invest in funds. Schwab doesn't charge a fee for any of these transactions. I don't pay a fee for these kind of transactions. You shouldn't. You can hold these. They are treasury bonds. The collateral on those bonds is the expected future tax revenues, whether they actually show up or not. Surplus or not, you get a guarantee. Guaranteed by what? The full faith and credit, which is backed by those vaults with the vague treasures. They securitize. You monetize the tax code and securitize it with reserves of various kinds, including those worthless mortgages from 2008. They are still the collateral behind this, not the collateral, the security, because nobody wants to repossess the American tax base because they don't have the authority to collect on it. But they know that there's an IRS and an army. You've seen ICE, right? You just move a couple letters around, you have IRS. You will pay your taxes. You will. You will pay your taxes. And if you get sick, you will go bankrupt. Nothing has changed. Nothing. You will see how familiar all this is, and you will see that nothing has changed. Ever. This has been going on for 14,000 years, and I will prove to you. My point today is this. If Christ's blood redeems all the blood debt, why was it a chthonic sacrifice? Well, if you know alchemy, and here's what an alchemist jumps into the storytelling in the Bible, as far as copies we have. Joseph of Arimathea very kindly takes Jesus' body and he prepares it and he does all the things. And he allows the family to take care of the body. It's a very kind gesture. It's a very expensive gesture. If Lazarus has a tomb and he's such close friends with Jesus and Jesus cries when he dies and Jesus resurrects him, then why didn't they use Lazarus' tomb? It was empty. One excuse would be because it wasn't empty. What's going on here? Did Jesus resurrect Lazarus after Jesus was resurrected? Some people think that there's just a slight mistake in the chronology. Maybe. Because I'm telling you, every story in that book is 100% true. And the reason I know that is because I recognized the pattern. It's all about the money. And when you realize it's all about the money, the book has to be true. They didn't change a word. That book is so true because it's all about the money, which to them was, if your body was, or you go today, what's wrong with me? They take a blood test and they test the blood and they tell you what's wrong with you. Your blood or your body are the symptoms of what's wrong with your inner system. In the cosmos, everybody knew the common sense, the common cosmos was when things were wrong with the money, things were wrong with the cosmos. When things were wrong with the cosmos, things would go wrong with the money. The money was just the symbol of the health of the system, which it is. The value. How much nothing is this worth? It depends on how much nothing the U.S. government's tax base is worth. It's all based on the tax base. The ability to project power. The ability to collect tolls over the Strait of Hormuz. I predicted this, but you didn't hear me. He already floated the name Strait of Trump. The rest of the world doesn't want to take responsibility. He's a real estate developer, infamous for taking on pie-in-the-sky Temple of Solomon projects. Am I far off? Oh, excuse me. I just went into debt $50. Nothing has changed one iota. Nothing has changed. Nothing. The tax man came at you 1,000 ways. Everything you did was wrong and cost money. The rich didn't pay taxes. You could tell. You think they got rich by paying taxes? They were the tax collectors. The tax collectors got a commission on every penny they squeezed out of the turnip. And now the middle class are getting sucked down by this. They can't get loans. They can't get loans at reasonable rates. That's because Herod has begun to monetize the anticipated future revenues from his new temple, which will draw in all of these pilgrims and all this anticipated revenue from Caesarea Maritima, etc., etc. Well, he has sold Peter to pay Paul 3 or 4 times. He has let the Caesar family invest by buying a lot of bonds. They hold a lot of bonds laundered through the Caesar private branch of the bank at Leontopolis. I will explain all of this. Philo of Alexandria explains it better than I do. It's all about the money. Okay, if the value of the Temple State Bank is based on anticipated future sin blood tax revenue, I know for a fact that once they consolidated the temple, you could make the pilgrimage, or you could just simply redeem because you have to buy it. You could bring an animal. Here's how it worked. You bring an animal, if you were wealthy enough to sacrifice one. The priest would sacrifice it. They didn't look at it, sacrifice it. You brought it in. Priest come back. You didn't get to see the sacrifice. This was in secret. The blood would be put on the altar, fat, whatever, however big your sin was. You had to tell how much your sin was, so you know how much big an animal to charge it. And if the smoke went up the nostrils of the chimney, it was the nostrils of the God. The priest would come back and tell you your sacrifice was accepted by the God, and you'd atoned. Guess how often that happened? Because 9 times out of 10, the priest would come back and say it wasn't accepted. You're gonna have to try again. Well, I can't go all the way home and get another goat. Well, we got something for sale over there. And you don't think we would sell you blemished goats or chickens or whatever, do you? So you go buy one. Well, this new temple, and by consolidating the temple and by requiring these pilgrimages by law, everybody knows we don't see that many animals go in the back door. They can't be sacrificing that many animals. And people are starting to mark these doves and whatnot. And they're selling this same animal over and over again. They're not sacrificing the animal. And they're telling you your sacrifice wasn't accepted. You have to pay for another. You go to hell. And you owe this debt. Everybody was in debt past their eyeballs to the temple state treasury that Herod was holding. The gold that he was supposedly collecting was supposed to be security backing these bonds he was selling on the valuation of an anticipated future temple revenue. But he had already transferred all the gold secretly to the shadow bank in Leontopolis, to the Caesars. It's their private bank. It's their private. Egypt was their private money factory, their own private province. My point is, when James tells the people that it's all corroded brass, it's not a metaphor. It's literally true. So fast forwarding to the Templars. What does it have to do with the Templars? It's about going back to Lazarus and Christ and the 2 different resurrections. If Lazarus is raised in the flesh, if he's raised back in his blood, he still owes that rolled over remitted debt to the state temple because he's legally dead. They picked up the mortgage on the farm. But Paul is going to claim that his debts he's debt free. Okay? But there are a lot of different ways of looking at it. Paul splits the hair over Christ's resurrection because, whether it was Jesus or not, Paul never heard of Jesus, but not the point. Christ is resurrected in the spirit, which is a Pharisee belief. Because if he's resurrected in the blood, even if it's the same old perfect blood, then the debt has just been rolled over. like in real life at the temple. The debt's just been rolled over. The debt to God has just been rolled over. That doesn't count. If he's raised in the Spirit, that's a new covenant with the new promise. And Jesus has the authority not only to forgive the monetary debt on earth, which is the same thing, but he has the authority to forgive sins. Because before, God could not just forgive your sins without you paying for them, because he'd be breaking his own law and he wouldn't be God anymore. That's the covenant. God was bound by his own covenant. Religion is a machine for controlling God. Don't forget that. But this is all about the money. So Jesus would have. So they're looking at Herod Agrippa. He's got the authority granted by the Romans by Caligula. He's the king. He can issue a debt jubilee, right? Well, there's excuse after excuse, and things get out of hand. Well, fast forward to the temples. The Templars. What do people believe about this? So, if Christ's blood flowed into the ground, it's gone. And then he's given this Spirit instead of blood, and that creates a new covenant. That's a very clever legal argument that Paul makes, and I will go through it with a fine-tooth comb. It's all about the money and who holds the lien. The church has now taken over the lien on your farm because they've taken over the lien on your soul, because they've taken over the lien on your blood. If Lazarus is legally dead, his debt's been remitted to the temple state. Now he's debt-free. It's like bankruptcy. And the reason they're talking about all this religious stuff is, to them in the cosmology, there was no distinction between the two. This is how it works. This is what the money is. So there's a guy named Robert de Boron who never lived, and he writes this masterpiece of literature called Joseph of Arimathea in around 1200, when the Templars are at their height. This is the Templar national myth. Stop me if you've heard this. Joseph of Arimathea not only saved the body, but he saved some of the blood and the heart, that water that came out. And the wine, of course, because this was the cup of the Last Supper. He had some wine from the Last Supper, had touched Jesus' lips. This had been transubstantiated, right? Depending on what you believe, split hairs, into the blood of Christ. But he also captured some of the blood of Christ. And remember, he doesn't just bleed through his wounds. He's stabbed through the heart, and it's the heart blood that has the water, the myocardial. So this is alchemy. The blood and the water come together. That is the fertilization. That is the consummation. That is the inception that gets the miracle of life going. It's the mixture of the water and the blood. And this is done. What happens next? If this blood is supposed to be a chthonic sacrifice, and the Bible says nothing about this. Joseph of Arimathea has been accused by Robert de Boron of embezzling the people's redemption by the blood of Christ. He has skimmed. Is the sacrifice not complete? Is that why the world continues to be the shithole? Is that why things have never changed? Is Joseph of Arimathea a good guy or a bad guy? He's covered by the gospel as a good guy, so whatever he does is good, right? It sounds like he has embezzled Christ's blood, some of it. All of this comes from Robert de Boron, who never lived. Boron is a village so obscure. There's no way this guy wrote this, let alone anybody would have read it. And it becomes the first conspiracy theory about the Templars, and they wrote it about themselves. They wanted people to think they had an inexhaustible supply of money. But if they said that, people would say, well, show it to us. They created a conspiracy theory about themselves because they knew people would believe it. Here's how the conspiracy theory goes. In the ancient world, an alchemist knew, but this was not common knowledge, that the blood of a high-valued sacrifice. Hi, username. Hi, 47. I'm too lazy to say 1647. Are you descended from, or have you now, or have your family ever been Jacobites? My ancestor was sent to America in chains, sentenced to 7 years slavery in the colonies. That was called transportation. He was a Jacobite. I'm going to talk about that. My family's up to their eyeballs in this. It's all about the money. So here's how it works. An alchemist would tell you, see, there's a way to make gold. This is the alchemy. You can make gold. You need a mineral called cinnabar, a blood red form of lead called cinnabar. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's mercury, not lead. This was how they looked at it. This was the science of the day based on their observations. And that plus this red sand, and you baptize all this with fire, but you don't burn it in the fire. You baptize it with fire. You got to put it in a crucible. You do all this stuff, you get gold. How do we explain this? If gold is the flesh or the blood of the gods, how does this come from cinnabar? You take the blood, it must be the blood of a god, and we distill it through this baptism of fire until it becomes, and the way this actually works is you get the mercury from the cinnabar. The hot mercury dissolves the gold that's in the this reddish, rusty colored ore, gold ore. Most gold is red sand. And the mercury dissolves the gold and it forms this paste. And then you baptize this with fire again, and the mercury boils off as a vapor and drives you utterly insane. Imagine how insane an alchemist would be. Isaac Newton, during his alchemy days, is described as being utterly mad. And later on, when he's master of the mint, when he's a bureaucrat hanging people by the dozen, he did. Isaac Newton fixed the money. It's all about the money. He got out of the lab and he got much better. Abraham Lincoln was taking these antidepressants called blue mass that were made with mercury, and it made him crazy. He quit taking those and he got better. I mean, mercury poisoning can have long-term effects. These alchemists, they discover this process. This was the secret of alchemy. And it's real. You can do this. You can make gold this way. So the blood, the cinnabar must be the blood of some precious sacrifices or blood of sacrifices. So Christ's blood, if it bled into the earth, would make cinnabar, right? Because they said the blood of these sacrifices, when it hit the earth, it formed an amalgam called cinnabar. I mean, this is pretty accurate shit. They weren't that dumb. So Christ's blood would make the highest quality cinnabar, right? And if Christ's blood is eminent, if he can bleed and never run out of blood, okay, then that would be an endless vein of cinnabar, right? I think the Templars really thought they were going to find cinnabar under the temple. I think that's what they were digging for. And I think what they found was books, account books, and they got Arabs to translate it. And I think they found the secret of paper money, which is you don't need gold. You just need to make people think you have either an endless supply. You need to make people think you have a reliable stream of revenue. That's all you need to do. And then you monetize that by issuing paper money, using that as collateral. And you securitize that. You enhance your credit rating by letting people know you have a certain reserve of gold and silver and heroin. You know how much heroin there is in Fort Knox? And they couch this in terms of, they encrypt it as allegory, and they also, they use it, they put it out there. They put it out there as a conspiracy theory so people will believe it. And the people will believe the Templars have all this gold that they found under the temple that Titus famously said he couldn't find. That's all about the money. And they let people know that they found it, and they couch it in terms that make it sound like it's an endless supply of gold. Because as long as people believe it's an endless supply of gold, it is an endless supply of gold because they can monetize this myth. They are monetizing the myth. And Robert de Boron creates the entire myth from scratch. And if Joseph of Arimathea has interrupted that stream of blood and brought it to Avalon and poured that on the ground, there would be an endless stream of cinnabar, which is gold in its raw form, in their alchemy, and they're very close to that. Then there would be an endless well of that in Avalon, right? Julius Caesar complains in his books. There's an obscure charge laid at the feet of certain Celtic tribes. They do not allow Roman merchants to do business in their territory, nor will they even allow Roman merchants to traverse their territory to do business on the other side. This is casus belli. This is economic damage. This is a casualty of war, and this is an excuse for, this is not an aggressive war of conquest. This is a defensive war. They will not allow ships to pass through the Straits of Hormuz. Therefore, that is an act of war. Therefore, a state of war already exists. Therefore, woe to the loser, especially if he is the aggressor, and clearly they are the aggressor. This is how it is done. It's all about the money. If there is this well of gold in Avalon that the Templars control, boy, they could just issue all. They could print this. They could print this by the bale. They could print this by the truckload. Paper money. You're allowed to use paper money as currency. That helps the economy inflate itself relentlessly. You are contributing. You are eating your own bullshit. You are eating your own faith. And it works. It makes the world go round. The Romans perfected this. It's all about the money. Are you with me? That's why I want to know what happens to Lazarus and his estate. Is this proof? You know, it gets garbled. What I like about the Bible, a lot of people accuse it of being fake. But if it was fake, it would be a better fake. It's interesting to see the pieces that they glued together and where they maybe got them from. Where does all this come from? Well, Aristotle had said in his book, Plato's book is called Res Publica in Latin, the Republic, Public Affairs. It is the handbook for communism, for state, central planned communism. No kidding. It's also Paul's church is kind of a, but there's Aristotle's, I don't think so. I think Paul's church is Aristotelian. Aristoteles wrote a book called The Body Politic. And I think it's much more instructive. It's the kind of the book of capitalists. He says, he uses the metaphor of blood to describe money's role in the economy. The blood is the life, and blood is the money acts like blood in the body politic. He literally says money is the blood of the body politic. So this idea was in the air. It was all about the money. And I think the Templars created this conspiracy theory about themselves to convince people of something that they didn't have, because they knew they would believe a conspiracy theory quicker than they believe anything else. And they locate this. There's a well of this stuff outside of the Holy Land, and that's in Avalon, which is an island off the coast of England, where Arthur was buried, like Christ. See? Are you with me? It's all about the money. Islam is all about fixing the money. I am not exaggerating in the slightest. The Assyrian Empire is all about the money and fixing the money. Jeroboam is the example of the greedy gangster getting high in his own supply. He's robbing the caravans who are paying him for protection. He is ordering shit from Amazon and on his grandfather's credit card and not paying for it. Jeroboam is the 80s guy, right? He's the bad example. It's all about the money. I don't mean that in a totally cynical way. We talk about the almighty dollar. People worship money today. There is no difference. The instinctive behavior of the human animal is the same. It is the same. And when an auditor is allowed, even after all of this, and the Romans passed these banking regulations, tax regulations, the Institute of Civil Service, the Institute of Professional Auditors, guess which is the only bank in the whole world that is exempt from outside audit? The Temple of Jupiter, the Roman Imperial Reserve Bank of Jupiter at Rome, was exempt from audit. It's all about the money. There is only one bank in the entire American banking empire, and I'm not exaggerating, and you know who I'm talking about. You know this. There's one bank that cannot be audited by any outside entity, and that is the Federal Reserve Bank. Why is that? They must have so much money. It's secret, so it must be a whole bunch of gold. That's the only possible secret that could be. Is there's a whole bunch of gold. Because if we don't believe that, the world comes to an end. So, watch. I will be back on here in a couple of days. I'm going to go back to the year 45,000 BC and show you that it's all about the money. It's all about the money. Remember, Jeffrey Epstein's whole business was pretty much all about the money.
I'm Professor Thomas Henry Horan, asking you to please stay plugged in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
He reads everything.
It's all about the money. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you later. Tell people I'm back on if maybe they don't care. But I'll be doing this. This is the show I always wanted to do, so here we go, okay? So take care of yourselves and each other. Please stay plugged in to the Stones Unturned podcast. It might even be worth it.